while we are getting organized and sitting down, hello, please. So I would like to just encourage you, during the break I took advantage of a few remaining ITBC blank forms and I scattered them on all the tables. You might be fortunate and not see one in front of you, but if you are unlucky and you got one, let me just encourage you, please, during this next couple of hours, this is a time to be writing things down, capturing them, and then leaving them, and we will collect them after the meeting is over. We're going to do two things going forward, which we'll talk more about at the end of the day. One of them is going to be, we're going to send out to all of you a copy of the electronic form of the ITBC. Tony, please. Yeah. Well, we're going to send out to all of you an electronic copy of the form so that you can give it some more thought and fill it out. As we said before, 2 weeks. The book stays open for 2 weeks, and it's just like it happened at the meeting. And secondly, we're going to be talking more about the Moon Village principles that we discussed yesterday. So, this afternoon, we have 3 pieces. One, the discussion of the results of yesterday. 2, the panel discussion, which Oleg Witkowski, the head of the Moon Market for the MVA Board of Directors, will be leading. And 3, closing remarks and announcements. I think what we will probably do is either take a very short mid-afternoon break or just encourage people to go out and come back if they need to. And that way we might be able to finish a little bit sooner. So to get started, let me encourage anyone who has not yet given me their slides for their report from the individual working groups to please bring them to me as soon as possible. I know there are several groups that are, in fact, still working on them. Yeah. Hi, John. Hi there. Which group?
I have an update, working group 3.
Oh, God. Sorry. I already have working group 3.
What?
I got working group 1. Okay, who is giving the brief for Working Group 1? Anybody here who's actually in Working Group 1? Okay, good. 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. Actually, can I have the participants of Working Group 1 join me, please, so we can all share the wealth? I'll do an introduction. So we have about half the folks. We have chairs if you want to sit. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Please. We even have more chairs. We're going to make this official. Oh, yeah. That's right. We have about half of our folks from Working Group 1 still here today. Yeah. You want to? Working Group 1 was focused on architectures and standards of lunar development, specifically focused on the human exploration aspect of it. So if you can hit the next slide for me, please. Here's a list of all the members and our organizational organizations that we're affiliated with, just for historical purposes, who is there. And then you know, we were tasked with the what and the when for human spaceflight with respect to the moon. And when we say human spaceflight, what we talked about most yesterday was the human factors, the habitats, and the life support associated with that. You can see some of these key issues that we talked about listed, and then some of the potential solutions that we'll go into in the slides. Do you want to go through isolation for us?
So I was tasked with thinking a little bit about human factors and issues to be considered. And I'm not an expert, although I have a background in psychology, so hopefully I had a couple of ideas. And the first thing I thought about was like isolation is an issue to be considered, especially in the lunar gateway. The habitational volume is very reduced. And then lunar habitats on the far side can provide views of Earth, and this has proven like a soothing dimension on the ISS with the cupola, etc. So what we can do in a habitat on the far side of the moon if you don't have those views. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Right. Possible solutions or possible approaches for this. There are people in California here developing virtual reality worlds where astronauts can meet their friends and relatives. It's called the Unstable Project, and this industry is called All These Worlds. I think they are up in San Francisco. And then there's like a French company called Polar developing virtual reality worlds where you can train and be in nature. So this has proven effective too to perhaps provide like a soothing or an effective psychological or something positive to be in space. And then I was surprised every time I go to a life sciences conference, no one talks about research on prisons because we have this heroic idea of astronauts and we don't perhaps take into account that living in these reduced spaces is very similar to being in a prison. So maybe we can just like take a look on that. And then I haven't written this Periscope Liberty. Is that you're doing? Okay, I don't know what that is. So do you know what it is? No?
I can, yes. So the Periscope Liberty, I believe, is a reference to like subs. So when just taking in consideration when you can see freedom, but you don't have the ability to access it.
And liberty refers to getting leave from the ship.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so next slide. Yeah, initially I wrote like darkness or, well, lunar dark cycles. This is something that people in the life sciences are actively researching, how altered circadian rhythms on the ISS jeopardize performance and then your health, etc. And the next slide, possible solutions. let me check because I think something has been changed here. Yes, of course, taking into account research already done on mines and Earth's polar regions, see the effects of altered circadian rhythms in shift workers, this has already been done, of course. But then there's this new, more innovative things, if you want, like the development of lighting technologies like bioluminescence that require low energy, and that can be helpful for the settlement or for the building of a lunar base. And right, the last point probably has been added, so I couldn't like speak for it. But yeah, next slide, please. So the medical, when we've been talking about like the issue of radiation, so cancer will probably be an issue in a lunar base, especially in the gateway, perhaps, because on the surface you can have like some shielding, or you can build like something on the ground, or some sort of habitat with a shielding there. And possible approaches would be consider anti-cancer treatment facilities or testing facilities on the moon, although it's like close enough to Earth so you can just like go back, but maybe not so much for Mars. And take into account psychological research on disability and loss of life related to illness, not so much like sort of a rocket explosion, but illness and disability in space. And of course, this has been already addressed, multicultural, cooperation in space, and the sort of tensions stemming from that. But then I ask also, or I was wondering if there's a risk of projecting geopolitical tensions into the lunar space, because we saw some presentations yesterday basically saying that Space Policy Directive 1 establishes, okay, let's, American preeminence in space, and not really a collaboration with China, but China has all these plans already, and they're just like the Chang'e missions, and I mean, they're going back to the moon maybe even earlier than the US. So if you have teams of Chinese and Americans going to the poles, what's going to happen, right? And approaches to be considered, perhaps like a standardization of key technologies like airlocks. And then someone wrote something about the food system that probably you can read it better than me from here. So yeah, an important approach is of course politics. Next slide, please. Not my job to figure it out. Maybe politicians or policymakers should be involved in that. And this is not mine, really. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was it.
All right, so my focus was on radiation protection, understanding that we have two primary sources of radiation, cosmic galactic rays, but also solar particle emissions, and understanding that there's one which is constant and the other which can be high energy and abrupt, but then also looking at how the environment on the surface of the moon might be able to mitigate some of that through enclosure systems. So here we looked at shielding, specifically technologies which could be multi-layered shielding systems, and trying to understand what are the kinds of factors that you can start to mitigate using very specific enclosure systems. Next slide. So here's, just to recap, so things to consider: galactic cosmic rays, high energy particle eruptions, but also high thermal differentials. Next slide. And that will lead to human biological effects, equipment exposure, so you have to be careful with where you place equipment and how you treat that equipment or protect it, and especially life support systems. So if you continue to the next slide. Here, some of the things that we can consider are the mass of the habitat. So the more mass the enclosure has, the more you can protect or shield. Also, the material composition of any design for that enclosure will have a really good effect on how to mitigate that. And we want to be able to understand to what degree we're actually mitigating the radiation inside the occupied space. So some testing would be really crucial to that. Next. And here are some strategic knowledge gaps or things that we can start to focus on developing. So for pre-integrated structures, you can imagine creating a deployable system where you jacket the deployable with water. And you can also, again, looking at different material compositions and the thickness, and putting equipment where you need the more mass. So in some cases, like you see in the ISS, a lot of the equipment is at the perimeter, which also creates a nice shielding effect. For more advanced concepts, you can think of using ISRU or a lot of mass. So if you can pack 3 meters or more of regolith, you can use that mass to reduce the amount of radiation. And then also looking at how you might be able to take regolith and turn it into building products like bricks for stacking. And finally, using underground procedures, so you can take advantage of lava tubes or caves and things like that. And then finally, there was one thing that came to mind after a presentation yesterday about creating individual vests. So if you do come up with a technology that can be thin and wearable, you can also protect humans while they're working on the surface of the moon using vests. Next slide. And so this one is not mine, is it? Yeah. So that, sure.
So branching off some of the radiation work that Daniel was talking about, for habitat design, we talked through some of the common approaches that you can build the structures and the enclosures, potentially making them modular, and in that way you would want some standards for where the interfaces are through modularity. I think there's been some concepts out there similar to this in transportation, the way that trains connect or buses connect. And in this way that you can make them basically extensible in that you can have a smaller structure when you have less people, but then it's upgradable and scalable when you start having more and more people. Next slide. And some of the potential solutions, it's not just mechanical interfaces, but of course electrical, and I would also argue the data and software. The analogy I think everyone thinks of here is Lego blocks, so that you can piece things together and they're standard. And then the other point that I would want to highlight on this is the anchoring and tethering. So whatever vehicles or equipment is outside, having a common interface to that across habitats. Next slide. Oh man, he had a good pitch for this. Does anyone else want to take this? It was Dale. Dale had a really good pitch for this. Okay, so energy. You know, one of the driving requirements is the wide thermal swings on the moon. You can see between lunar day and lunar night. And then obviously the vacuum of space. And the trade-off also gets into maintainability. Are these systems going to be replaced often, or do they need to work for a long period of time? Because that drives what type of systems you choose here. Next slide. Okay, so then Dale also wanted to highlight that the real big problem is this 2-week cycle for lunar day and lunar night. So you're going to have some type of energy storage if you don't have a constant supply of energy. So a lot of our discussion for energy focused on what type of storage would be best and what goes into those trades. So talked about the solar cell the fuel, fuel cell technology, yeah. And then as well as what type of batteries you would want. We had some discussion earlier about newer types of batteries. And then there's also some other more mechanical systems that could fit into the trade space, mainly pneumatically compressed air or flywheels, potential energy storage essentially, instead of chemical or electrical storage. And then we also spoke a little bit about how to increase the amount of power that you're getting from the sun or from a energy source like nuclear. Yeah, and we talked about the heliostat and space-based solar power as well. There's still a couple. Next slide, please. So I won't go through every one of these, but there's pros and cons to everything that we talked about. I think, yeah, next slide. There's some more pros and cons for space-based solar power. Next slide. So we talked about, if you can make space-based solar power work, the big pro is that you don't have to go down to the surface to upgrade or scale or replace certain components. And kilopower is also an attractive option for a constant power supply because you need something as a backup as well. And yeah, this is where I talked briefly yesterday. We were talking about standards, and obviously this is a little bit far out. At some point you got to get down into the details, but certainly like the rehash of the Edison-Tesla discussion will be had in different ways as well, as far as what type of current you need and connectors and everything that goes into the details when you actually get down. One of the things that I think was interesting that we talked about was at some point you're going to have to choose what type of wire you need, copper or aluminum. And there were some people in our group that had fires in their houses because of mixed copper-aluminum wiring. So aluminum probably has the advantage on the lunar surface, we think, because you have whatever you can make out of the regolith probably has a little bit of an advantage. Okay. Did you close the loop? I did. Yeah, I think we're close.
Oh. Yeah. Well, then I can cover off on closed loop life support quickly because I'm not exactly an expert on closed loop life support, but I did my best to the old college try, as you will. Anyway, we basically looked at, there's a lot of issues with closed loop life support. Of course, it's not really been done yet, but I have a colleague that has some expertise in this, and I asked him about it, and he basically, the bottom line was that it needs to be some kind of combination of mechanical, physico-mechanical, and bioregenerative. If you just have the bioregenerative by itself, it's a bit too fragile, and the simulations kind of show that it's a challenge to maintain. If you look at Biosphere 2, that's obviously was one of the lessons from that, I think. But yeah, so that was sort of the long and short of it. If you want to scroll down, let me see what the next slide is. A couple different concepts we identified. There's a NASA concept of a controlled ecological life support system. And then go down again one more. And then there's the ESA concept of Melissa. Both of them were trying to find ways to do it. The other thing I thought was interesting that I learned was that the Chinese apparently have the most successful closed loop test system right now. I guess their system, the Lunar Palace, has been running for a year with 4 people in it, and they claim 99.9% effective. So, okay. Is that you?
I value in situ resource utilization. We will use the indigenous and recyclable material with the water, cement, sand, and to protect the humans from the harsh environment, cosmic ray, and also dust, temperature fluctuation, minus 150 to the plus 150, and to operate the construction system in a space environment. So we can find the potential solutions, extraction efficiency for volatiles and solids, and 3D printing with the powder or the pellet, and metallurgy and sintering, and material recycling and transportation.
And then this one slide, at some point we're going to have to figure out where the limit is for artificial gravity and how you exercise, how that affects muscle mass and bone mass. Next slide. And then for EVAs, it's similar to the habitat discussion. Common interfaces, you want to try and standardize those, but then leave the actual design of EVAs or rovers up to whatever entities are designing those. But it would help the industry, I would argue, to drive common interfaces so you can share the infrastructure. You can go ahead, next slide. And that's it. Thank you.
So is Working Group 2 here yet? Working Group 2, that was science-driven. Madhu?
Yes, John, you thrust me in there, so I spent a little time with the science.
Good. Please. And do you have any slides?
Yeah, I emailed them to you, but I have them on the memory stick.
Working group 2?
It should be MVA working group or something like that.
Okay.
Not
Here, take this with you.
Do we get a guitar too?
No, you get an accordion.
I'll kick it off and then you guys. Okay. John C. Mankins at moonvillageassociation.org. While John gets that ready, since I only have one slide and it's going to be kind of the basis for a more organized version of the summary I gave yesterday, I want to just say as a preamble, I had seen John's charge to the working groups, especially the first 3, that is to say human spaceflight science versus commerce driven, as we know it's going to be a combination of all 3, and we're kind of all here because we like the commerce part and we think that's what's going to drive that. But my interpretation, and John can correct me if I'm wrong, is those can be seen as 3 orthogonal axes, and any architecture or path to lunar settlement will proceed in that space. So what we were asked to do was pretend you were only on one axis, and each group gets an axis, and then through these 3 reports, we can craft a means of plotting a roadmap. We were charged with science, but as John had suggested, we were going to proceed not entirely as if the other 2 didn't exist. We had them in mind. And so I saw, for instance, human spaceflight as being Apollo model, science being an Antarctic research base or even an ISS model, and commercial as being pretty much everything else we've done this weekend. This is our group, and 3 of us are on stage. If anybody else participated that's out there, I think most of them have left. Well, 2 of them snuck out while I wasn't looking. So let's go to the second and only other slide. I'm going to blast through this as a means of saying what I did yesterday in a more organized form. Now, meaning right now, what are the things we can do to enable lunar science? And lunar science, we broke down with some prompting from John, thank you, into science of the moon, science on the moon, and science from the moon. And it's going to kind of proceed in those 3 in that order, but overlapping. So right now we can do science of the moon, that is, what is the moon like? Where do we want to set up our base? What would it take to get a small group of scientists to live on a base on the moon, which presumably might be more austere compared to, say, tourism, but still they need to be productive. Their time is very valuable. So human factors research that's being done now for ISS, for analog research stations, et cetera, would be very valuable. We also want to figure out where we want to actually go. So that's step 0. Step 1 is how many bases should there actually be, and where do we want to put them? So we concluded that we need at least 1 base on the far side of the moon for electromagnetic quiet. The polar regions are also of extreme interest, so probably 1 base at least should go there to prospect for volatiles at the bottom of shadowed craters, especially if they're near peaks of eternal sunlight. We also want to investigate the certain features of geological interest, such as lava tubes, such as the South Pole Aitken Basin region, which is an impact region on the far side, which may or may not be where we want to put observatory. And speaking of observatory, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but that's the science from the moon. So science of the moon is, what is the moon like, especially in terms of where we want to put the bases, and then the initial science we're going to do is going to further that and extend that, and that doesn't end, but the others come into play. Science on the moon, as we pick up samples, We analyze them in a lunar laboratory. We continue our human factors research so we can enable longer scientific stays. We work out the mission architecture of the scientific research, that is, assuming a small crew of nominally 4 scientists in what eventually be a continuously operated base. The questions arise as how long would they stay? We imagined a few weeks at first, then on the order of a month, and then on the order of maybe a year or more as things progressed. The other thing that must happen synergistically with this is if the crews are going to rotate home, how often do they do this? Are there periods where nobody is on the base, or do we have overlapping crews? A lot of that is going to depend on other developments, such as the availability of flights from Earth to the moon and the ability of people to live on Earth. We had identified some other human factors issues, such as tolerance to 1/6 gravity in short, middle, and long-term stays, and tolerance to radiation. How much protection do we really need? We have a lot of data on people living in the moon for just a few days, and they were mostly men in their 30s. But what happens if, what happens to the reproductive system in the long term? Are people who stay in the long term going to be asked to sign some kind of waiver that they agree that they may come back unable to have children, and so on? Further down, as we get into the midterm through the far term, and we learn more about how to operate these bases and build larger structures, we envision observatories on the far side of the moon, radio telescopes, large arrays or very large dishes such as Arecibo or FAST, or large numbers of smaller ones as we progress to the future. And that's all I remember. So Madhu, you want to take it from there?
Okay, good. I was moving around, but I got 2 or 3 ideas, John, that need attention. The first one is, this is a question to all of you. Why is lunar lava tube exploration not on the decadal survey? That is unbelievable to me that scientific committees decide to look for the origin of life in Europa when we should be looking for places for humanity to stay and live. Because we may find life, but we won't be alive to see it. That's scary. Yes, second one is climate change record. The moon is a dormant body over billions of years, since pretty much the age of the solar system. I think there must be a way to extract information about solar activities. Every time the sun burps, something happens on the lunar surface. There must be a way for us to access that information. And that would make a nice climate record for us to do all the climate change studies we want. Because right now, the solar records we use are so small compared to the age of the sun. It doesn't mean anything. So it's a very good idea to look at climate change records on the moon. And the third one is my favorite. It's not mine, really. It's from one of my students some years ago. He mentioned, we have incredibly high energy cosmic rays running all across the universe. Why should we have accelerators when we just need to put the target in the right spot and get incredibly high GeV impacts? I don't have a solution for it, but it's a thought.
Pass it on to Ron.
Well, the only thing I'd add, I guess, is that we looked at this from a from a traditional sense of developing a moon base, the kind of stuff we've been thinking about for the last 50 years. Should something come along like BFR, all of this is probably totally obsolete. We got LOP-G on there. We don't know if that's going to survive. One would hope we can move things way up forward in the next 10 years. I guess the bottom line is things could change really quick in today's environment.
I don't have anything to add, actually. It was captured, but we can start taking questions.
Actually, I have, before we pass it on.
Before or after?
Yeah.
Before or after?
Well, let's let everybody get a chance to speak.
Yeah, there are many discussions on that. And I realized that not only for taking care of the science to know the moon very well or something like that, but what is the important thing is in a gradually growing society, community, village in the moon surface, just let me say the planetary civilization type of things. The science for this and sociology and economy and humanity, something like that, that will be the gradually importance will be growing. That's I realized throughout the discussion.
Before we move on, I had one other comment. One of our earlier attempts to categorize the different kinds of science identified 3 or really 4 areas of science that you can do on the moon. Well, there's, we mentioned human factors, and there is lunar science, which is the obvious part, Earth science, which Madhu referred to, and space science, that is the observatories and everything else. So really there are 4 different kinds of scientific subject matter that you would study on the moon. Oh, I guess we're ready for questions?
Yeah. Geology?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, I used the wrong term. When I meant human factors, I actually meant both psychological and ergonomic factors and biological factors. And so there's really 2 in there. Dale?
Yeah, just a suggestion for Madhu. The sun puts out a solar wind. That solar wind impacts on regolith. That gives you a point. There are layers on which crater stuff has fallen. If you can dig through those, you can get other data points going back through time. You won't get a continuous record, but you can get spot records.
Oh, there's a great deal of debate, Dale, on whether this is possible, but I believe it's possible.
So, Dale, that was an excellent point. Be sure to write up the ITBC on that. I'm sure your hand works well. You could just write that down and make sure that this gets into the written record. Doesn't rely on Madhu remembering that he should have said something about it in the larger slide deck that I'm sure you guys are going to work up, because the one slide that you put up there may have been a useful cue to help you recall the conversations that you had, but in no way did that one slide document any of the things you said. You said all these wonderful things.
Well, we never reconvened. We either fell asleep or got drunk. I don't know what happened.
But the only thing I would ask is, again, the book is still open for another 2 weeks. So please don't let this be the formal written record of what sounded like a fabulous conversation, but instead take a chance. Maybe you've all got each other's email addresses. You could sketch a few more slides, put them together, kick them around. Anyway, Seth, you recounted a great half a day of conversation, but none of the, you didn't even mention a radio telescope in the slide.
That's right. Actually,
no, it's not on there.
No, you're right, on the side.
The written record does not reflect the wonderful conversations that you had.
Well, the good thing is John transmitted the message exactly as it happened. I was there. It was a good conversation.
Oh no, I understand. But the written record is that one slide, and I have to say, the conversation that you were describing sounded so much better, so much richer than that one slide. So please let me encourage you.
Yes, we will do that. And I think using the...
And the ITBCs are okay too. ITBCs are great. Use the ITBCs. You can capture your thoughts. But the way it is right now, it doesn't even mention radio astronomy. Doesn't mention the Aitken Basin. Nothing in writing.
Clarity, specific.
Yeah. I mean.
One more thing that my co-conspirator, Dave Shrunk, has been really hammering on is seed-to-seed life cycle of plant growth.
Sure.
In partial gravity and under radiation conditions. Write that down, guys.
Where's a blank ITBC?
Do we have time for a question from
We really don't. We really don't. I'm sorry. Oh, Giuseppe wants me to ask you the question, did you talk about the Moon Village principles?
The closest we came was the discussion about some human factors and the path
Okay.
to lunar settlement in the three-dimensional space.
Okay.
You can capture that in the slide.
Okay, so thank you very much. But please, more slides. Words, otherwise, that's all we have is... Excellent, that's what I like to see. Group number 3, please. They answered. They answered. I asked, they answered. No. They said, they said no, they did not. The closest they got was a discussion of human factors. So the rest of group 3 is going to rely on authority. I think that's a fine idea. No. You go ahead.
I thought your idea about delegation was very appropriate.
Sure, yeah, come on up. Group 3. It ought to be the latest. That's the mic, please. All right.
Oh, these are not the same.
And I'm still looking for group 4.
These are not the same slides.
Oh, that's okay. I just changed the template or the cover page to be a little more informative. It's okay. All right. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Okay, everybody. Hello. All right. So, thank you. We are working group 3. We focused on commerce and settlement. We started out with some catalytic presentations to kind of get the juices flowing and think about the huge question of commerce and settlement. So. We had topics, several topics on power production using sunlight and local resources. There were different approaches between manufacturing solar panels on the lunar surface and redirecting solar energy into permanently shadowed regions with heliostats. And then we moved into transportation from there with a couple presentations on depots and space tugs and cislunar transport, and we finished off with lunar site development and the far-reaching vision of that into the mid-21st century. So that really got us started and got our momentum going. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, and we had an avatar presentation as well where the business model was, I guess, avatars as a platform. You virtually embody a robot that you could use as a tool on the moon or whatever you like and test it out with Earth-based analogs. So thank you for that. And so from there, we nope. Okay, real quick. So we talked extensively on the Moon Village principles to start, and we quickly hooked on to standards. And I know that there's a standards group within the Moon Village Association, but we took it as our job in commerce to talk about that and the impact it has on commercial implications and settlement. Several people have quoted, you know, System A doesn't interface well with System B, and somebody gets locked outside of the space station and can't find their keys. So that would be a terrible scenario. So that's an extreme example of the need for common standards in space. We quickly got into the policy and authority discussions around who should be writing these standards and who pays for them. And naturally, like so many of the missions that are already flying today, they utilize terrestrial standards that are not necessarily written for space. So we stuck to that model and believe that we can work off of existing standards and modify them for the lunar mission roadmap with the recommendation of Moon Village Association.
Yeah, there should be at least one ITBC on that, and that was in the proposed principles. The components were not included, and it's important to have component standards for interchangeability, like the commercial airlines developed them with radios and engines and all sorts of things. So AirInk's a good model. I wrote that up. It got turned in. Within the group, I don't. It's yeah, and that was about. I think that was the only suggested change to the principles was add components.
I'll just add one final note on the standards slide. So we talked a lot about standards, and then it came up. There's already standards group. Why should we worry about this in commerce? And it's important because having standards lowers the barriers to entry for new players who don't have to start from first principles, and it generally just streamlines costs and makes it faster for everybody to be a player in space.
Also more reliable if you can swap boxes out.
So why development and commerce? Who wants to take this one?
I'll say. So we want to do it to create wealth. We want to expand the econosphere out to the moon and include that in Earth's business case. Space-based solar power is a source of income in the long run. Transportation and tourism, a big question in the room was, but why go? Who's going to go? Why would they go? Why would they go? Well, because. The answer is because. Why do we do anything? It's because. Because I want to, because you want to, because anybody wants to. We do things because. Where do we want to go? Where should the Moon Village be located? One place, multiple places? Where should the first place be? How do we find that out? And so the science is going to tell us that. And then the FAR term where is multiple diverse locations. I mean, if you look at the CE&R studies, concept exploration refinement studies, the architecture studies for the vision, one of the teams presented 61 locations of interest where we should be going to. So, and I'm sure there are more.
Right. So, yes, just to reiterate the topic of where, in our prompt in the near, mid, and far term, it all just said lunar poles, lunar poles, lunar poles, and we quickly took issue with that. And again, the science will tell us where to go, and it's sort of a catch-22. Where do we send a probe to answer what questions? And so, to that effect, it's a nice segue into. Did we skip one? Okay. Okay, so the initial products that we envisioned for a lunar economy varied greatly between hard and soft deliverables. On the harder side, we envisioned commodities and raw resource extraction and production would be some of the first building blocks for civilization and settlement. everybody's been talking about water extraction, but someone aptly brought up that extracting oxygen is easier in some ways than going off and hunting for ice. You can extract it from the metal oxides in regolith through various thermodynamic and biological means. And it's definitely important. It's half of the equation, or stoichiometrically 1/3 of the equation in water production.
By mass with oxygen, hydrogen, it's 80% of the mass, so it's a major part of the solution. So, and it could be done probably earlier and support doing the search for the ice.
Thank you. Right, so in addition to hard materials and whatnot, we also discussed tourism, and tourism isn't just the taxi that takes somebody here and there. There's a whole network of services and a food chain to the tourism delivery industry, and so we didn't like calling it tourism. We preferred calling it tourist services. So it's the launchers, it's the landers, it's the rest stop that feeds people, habitats, yes, habitats, hotels, etc. And so tourist services are definitely a near-term objective.
Here, he's been listening to this for 15 weeks now.
All right. I'm sorry, one more thing on the last slide. So we finished off, okay. Silicon Valley, we wanted to focus on what are 21st century technologies we can bring into the space industry. And so just down here at the bottom, we listed a whole bunch of them and worked through that. So I think in general, there's a need to bring in cutting edge stuff that might not necessarily appear to fit within our space roadmap, but we need to take it seriously and be imaginative. All right, markets. Mark, would you like to talk about markets? Okay, never mind. So we couldn't talk about commerce without talking about money and investment, and so we had some discussions about what sort of investment schemes would fuel our commerce and settlement. There were traditional methods such as public-private partnerships, which has been a buzzword in the community. We also talked about governments and national pride. National pride has not receded as a driver in significant financing for space projects from both government entities and national firms. And then blockchain eventually came up, and it's timely for Spacebit to be here with us. We really got into blockchain, not just in terms of a currency and exchange of value and transaction, but to partially solve the problems with property and property rights. There's ways you can use blockchain to tokenize assets and even serve it as a public land registry. And ICOs. ICOs have been very popular for quick fundraising. What do we have? So there was a lot of if BFRs in here. So we believe in BFR, and we think it will be realized. And so following that vein, our predictions are that by 2030, we will have a critical mass of stuff and like base tools, materials, methods, and lessons learned by the 2030s. And after the 2030s, we'll hit full swing in terms of capitalizing on those early lessons learned and wins, so that by the 2040s, we expect to have a highly developed mining operation going on and building society on top of those building blocks. Right. Everything shifts to the right, but we still envision something similar.
But even if BFR makes it cheaper to launch stuff from the Earth, it also makes it cheaper to launch the manufacturing, the mining, and all that kind of equipment, so it scales well.
Thank you. Right, so here is a general list of players. We've identified some of them have gotten a lot of attention recently. You know, obviously BFR, Blue Origin, many of the lander operations going on, CSDC and the space tugs, governments such as China and Russia with eyes on missions to the moon and manned missions to the moon. Russia also has a lander. Yeah, so the 2020s will be an age of transportation and early resource development.
I'd like to mention the last item on the list, Millennium 2045. This is something I heard about within the last month. A company is putting together plans for developing condos on the moon for millennial retirees. And 2045 is the target year.
Thanks.
That's why I'm here.
Okay, thank you very much. Wrong one. Gary, what's the title of your deck? Team 4. And that was there's both the PDF. The name is Team 4. Guinea Space. It's like Team 4. There's a Team Space 4. There's a PDF and a PowerPoint. Team Space 4. Can I try to get this? I think I didn't get it downloaded because my computer was right underneath me. I know I downloaded it. My trouble is I didn't get a chance to ever go back and look at the email. Come on up. Hey, somebody's got to, keep me honest and. Yep. Okay, we'll be slowly but surely getting Team 4 together here. We had a number of different participants, some of which are able to be with us here. Well, my apologies, I'm going to slaughter a few people's names here. Mahalo Kalapin, Mark Knoll, who's with us here on stage. Come on up. Rob Chambers, he looks like he may have escaped. Torsten from PT Scientists, Christine Nobi, Pavlo Tanazak, okay. Tachi, myself, Gary Barnhard, Ravi, Deepak, Samuel Reed, Swatha from BitSpace. You're welcome to please join us if you like. Peter Schubert and Nick Nelson. Okay, so things is roughly based on the catalytic presentations that we had, as well as a set of general comments and discussions. The first presentation that was given was on energy utilities. We had fairly extensive discussions distilled down in terms of the areas that there seemed to be resonant themes or agreement. Was one with respect to the interfaces, both material, energy, and data, that we're looking at trades between effectively organic and evolvable interfaces versus dictated ones. The choice of the interface planes is likely to be very critical, both in terms of software and hardware, both to interoperability and standardization, and this ends up being an economic driver that has cascading impacts throughout the different activities. Folks, if I cross anything up, or think that there should be expanded on differently, feel free to interject. Okay, okay, not yet, no.
Okay. Again, this notion of choosing the interface lines very carefully, we think MVA could provide a means of reaching consensus on a number of these issues that would be very useful. We had another catalytic presentation, roughly translated on to being evolved transactional management, really looking at things like data transfer, monetary considerations, advanced blockchain applications, things of that nature. Really it falls into the realm of transactional management and distributed ledger technology, of which there are many applications, including control applications that come into play. The evolution towards dynamic communication technology and applications and the Internet of Things as it actually gets implemented in dynamic communication architectures. Next slide. We had another catalytic presentation, which was a very well articulated end-to-end ISRU process flow. From Peter Schubert, based on his research team's activities. One of the key things was, though, how do you turn a very interesting technical discussion into something that would actually get implemented? Okay, this process of going from discussion to actualization, again, is an interesting niche to the extent that this Moon Village Association can offer, some entree into helping to realize that. The other thing that came out of this is really a need to have one or more implementable memes or heuristics, okay? And what we mean by that is that in making a case for something, it not only has to be able to be accessible and understandable to the folks that have to go off and build it, but also to the folks that have to pay for it and the folks that have to think it's a good idea that it happens. And one of those examples was a woman on the moon. Okay. When you start playing out from a societal standpoint what the implications of that are, it ends up being, in technical terms, there are certain things, certain problem spaces that you dive into where the deeper you go, the more narrower the focus is. There's a subset of problems, however, that the more you dive into them, the broader the applicability turns out to be. Okay, in a very real sense, what an implementable meme or set of heuristics are in those regards is a characterization of problem spaces that expand as you dive into them to understand them. Next page. We also had a catalytic presentation that was offered up on fostering cooperation, collaboration, and competition. Strangely enough, it's rather unheard of for me to present something that actually shows up on one chart, okay? But the experience of making cooperation, collaboration, and competition work in the space station program with respect to the robotic systems integration standards, and overall comes down to three things in terms of understanding what matters with respect to the process of engagement. One, the idea that the needs need to be collectively envisioned and defined, not dictated. Secondly, control is negotiated and managed and ultimately delegated to whatever level it takes to actually make things work. And third, it really has to be, what is built has to be based on what the confluence of interests are. Next slide. Okay, we did take a tact that looked at some of these other questions that showed up under production. The export need is going to change. There is more imports early, less later. Hopefully, there's a need to orchestrate this evolution. And what are the phases of it? We have to look at what are the things that we can sell to Earthlings. There are longer-term items, such as the evolution of space solar power, nearer-term items in terms of luxury items, tourisms, things that have shown up with a number of others. There are some things that will show up later in the charts about this notion of, offshore accounts, the ultimate bolt holes for folks that are in need, and how we deal with, advertising and different things like, space sanitariums and whatnot. Next page. With respect to infrastructure, the analogy of what was done with respect to space station. When space station was a one-trick pony, it never sold, okay? Some enterprising folks came to the idea that, well, what happens if we actually engage the different potential communities of interest and create a mission requirements database of all the things that people think might be a reasonable thing to do and try and fill it out in terms of understanding what the requirements might be. We came up with over 1,000 missions and went to Congress and said, okay, take us on. All right, it ended that argument. There's some analogies there that may be useful for how we proceed with respect to the lunar evolution. We need to think about the things that are going to make the local economy, not just sold to earthlings, okay? Both in terms of how we develop utilities, the notion of, we saw about seed repositories, there's also data repositories, other biological samples, this notion of how we build up the materials extraction, processing, and manufacturing. There's a whole chain. Next slide. And there's some interesting implications. I alluded to this notion of offshore accounts, opening up an interesting Pandora's box of things to explore. How do we avoid moon tar? This is no joke, folks. We've got to get better about it and think about this in advance. Otherwise, we'll take it in the rear. Okay, it won't be pretty. Okay, the long and short of it is, once upon a time, the U.S. government had a policy of encouraging the use of international commercial launch vehicles, and a brave soul took that very seriously in terms of a large aerospace company, and booked a launch on the Chinese Long March. There was a problem, though. The attitude control system didn't work, so they fixed it. It's an intercontinental ballistic missile, folks. I'm sorry, that bought us ITAR in a big way. There's probably other examples, but that's the cause de célébrer. My apologies for abusing French. Okay, we need to think about what are the checks and balances that will provide for and allow for enduring privacy and autonomy. And what do we do to bias the solution space to success? We've got to be about the business of architecting win-win deals. Next slide, I think that may be. We have at least 8 different items to be considered. And if anyone sees your favorite that you wrote up that you'd like to expand on, I would be happy to. Okay. Well, the idea, you got the fostering cooperation, collaboration, competition stuff. We talked about the importance of memes, the notion of Moon Mart and the evolving local and export economies. There's this notion that the strategic goals are insufficient in terms of what's laid out in the principles. Okay, you need to go and develop as a goal, develop and promote the competing scenarios that lead to a minimization of a dependence on an infusion of government resources. We need to figure out how we're going to be facilitating a lunar economy, and deal with archiving of resources, and really figure out how to make the end-to-end logistics train work. Thank you all very much.
So one thing about archiving of resources, we talked about the Moon Miners Manifesto. This is the Moon Village Association. I'm sure you guys all know about Peter Koch and the Moon Miners Manifesto, the newsletter that he wrote for 30-some years. So Peter Koch, with the help of James Burke, he is actually doing the archiving for us. This is volume 1 of Peter Koch's writings. It's more than 700 pages, but you wouldn't know that by looking at the book because they forgot to put page numbers. So, I know, and they sold I don't know how many copies of these before a book editor like me looked at it and said, wait a second, there's no page numbers here. So I am proofreading this book for free for James and Peter, and it's going to take me a while because there's a lot of pages. So this will be proofread before the end of the year, and James is going to update the file, and then if you buy it in January, it will have page numbers, and certain things will be corrected. But and volume 2 is coming. Yes.
How many of you know Peter Koch? They don't know too many else.
Yeah.
Please, we have to move on.
Yes, we're done.
Yes, I understand that. I saw that yesterday. We couldn't leave the room.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, may we please, they already answered. They already gave their comment on the MVP. They actually brought it up also. So, lastly but not leastly, Group 5. Members of Group 5. Yes. Well, I'm sorry, it's too late to provide slides.
Huh? Michelle, thank you very much. It's dangerous.
No, I think we're behind. But we keep talking about
Do you need my memo? Your memo? You gave me? But everything in the slide. After. So, it's time to start? Okay. Like this, we are very big group, number 5, and we are 4 working group. The first one is cooperation and coordination. So who is the group for cooperation and cooperation? Cooperation and cooperation, yes. And the second group, working group, is analog. Who is analog? Only one?
Well, everybody else left.
Okay. So third working group is culture. Culture? Okay. And the last of the working group is the outreach. Okay. So start with the list of the members, and the real one is like this, more increasing the member.
Okay.
Okay. So the first is cooperation and coordination is land.
Okay, as we said, it was such a big group working this, we thought it was maybe more productive to break up into smaller groups. So a few of us got together to discuss CNC. So the matrix shows the 6 major issues that we identified, and I won't even go through them, But that's just a summary, but we have a separate chart for each one. So go on to the next. Go on to the next chart. Okay, so first one we identified was, it's been discussed in several of the other group standards. That's going to be an issue in terms of, we're going to have compatibility of hardware and software interfaces and operation procedures. And the only new thing we bring to the table, I think nobody's discussed before, is the use of confers, which is a fairly new group that's just been formed to develop standards for satellite operations. And it's very timely because I'm flying to DC tomorrow for the second meeting of confers, and then there's a satellite servicing conference that's associated with it on Thursday and Friday. So what we would propose is taking that, whatever comes out of that over the next couple of years as a foundation, but then extend it to surface operations. But the main idea is to have compatible interfaces. Next chart. Okay, this is a big one. It's been a big hot topic in Copios in the last couple of years, now that with what Luxembourg's been doing and so on. But how are we going to have permission or the ability to actually utilize resources on the moon? And what we recommend is multilateral agreements among like-minded nations, which is similar to what Scott was talking about yesterday, I believe. So the idea would be to establish a framework via state-to-state agreements for resource utilization. And it's useful to make three different kind of distinctions, to distinguish the three different kind of use cases. The first is crucial, absolutely crucial, which is what do we need to use on the moon to survive and thrive and grow on the moon. The second one is commercial and space use. For example, if somebody's mining lunar ice, but then selling it to Elon, so he can go to Mars. And that's a commercial application. The third one, which is the one that's the most concern for people who favor the moon agreement, is what happens when space resources come into the terrestrial economy. And these multilats you might have one that covers all of them, or they may require different agreements. Next. Civil rights of people participating in a lunar village. Again, we would say we'd need to establish some sort of recognition through state-to-state agreements, things like property rights, and perhaps even real estate, which is kind of problematic under international law right now. Privacy, there's traditional Bill of Rights kind of stuff. Next. We're going to have to have dispute resolution of some sort. And there's two approaches that could be taken. One would be, again, multilat, and you could use the ISS governing agreement as a model for this, because there are different, we actually have procedures in the ISS agreements about what do you do if there's a dispute between the Russian segment and the American segment, or the US segment, or the Japanese segment. But we would not take that as a model, but then take into consideration any peculiarities of the environment on the moon. But a different approach could be to say, have a multilateral agreement that the moon village itself can decide how to allocate disputes within itself as part of the governance. And I think there's one more. How are we going to govern ourselves? This is kind of a big issue. So how do what we want to do, again, I think it's going to require, at this point in time, state-to-state agreements granting the participants the right and power to create a self-governing regime. And so it would establish a compact of some sort. And this is, we saw this as an issue. I'm not sure where it's cooperation or coordination or what, but there are going to be people who don't like what we're doing for various reasons. So all we can say is we got to try to convince them that we're right. And these are the stages you put out, you do outreach, you explain, you involve them so they feel some ownership, you try to influence, inspire, and so on. But that's kind of goes without saying. Yeah, or ignore, depending on who they are. But.
If you have something more. No? So thank you. The next one is analog. Mark.
Okay, I inherited this chance to talk to you all. And I found out about 3 or 4 hours ago that I would have to talk. So I didn't prepare the slides, all of them, and I just tried to put things together from the pictures that I got, that I had of what we sketched on the board. Anyway, I'll talk about analogs, and first is the spelling of it. Analogs, I tend to spell a slightly different way with a L-O-G-S, almost like the old science fiction magazine Analog, which has a nice ring to it. So there are two ways. And also, we didn't really discuss principles versus principles, but I think the principle ought to be to spell it right. Anyway, so what are we doing here? As a working group, we're trying to identify and coordinate activities related to terrestrial analogs for the moon, also using the moon as an analog for Mars, and working with the other Moon Village working groups in order to sort things out and provide a forum for testing things. So, key questions, what types of activities are appropriate for testing? I'll try to get to this. What analog facilities already exist? Where are they located? What new analog facilities are being considered? Where would these be located? And how might Moon Village capabilities in the near, mid, and far term provide an analog facility for subsequent space exploration and ops? I didn't really get to sort out near, mid, and far in sorting things here. And did we already do this? Concept of operations, what do we do on Earth? Exploration procedures, man-machine interfaces, human-machine interfaces. Near the moon, test different technologies in deep space, essentially. And on the surface, lots of things that maybe I can talk to in a little bit more detail. So what's been done in the past? There's Apollo heritage of simulations that were done in Hawaii, Arizona, human proving grounds, Flagstaff area. In about 2008, Steve Hoffman did a good review of the current then analog activities, and one of them was Devon Island, Houghton Crater in Canada at the time, and Nemo, Desert Rats, some others. What's being done in the present, now I don't have all the things down. The ones that I'm more closely associated with that I know of are Pisces, and High Seas. Those are both in Hawaii on the Big Island. And the connections with Iloig and others. The other things that I'll get to about in a minute are future things with High Seas that I think we've already heard about a little bit. And I think Hank Rogers would have been here, but he had to go start a new crew at the High Seas module. Mahina is another area over there that's it's a name for a lunar-based simulation activity. There's also a discussion of a Moon-Mars analog base possibly being created around Tucson, Arizona, within the group. Next, and I'll probably go to smaller print. Yeah, we'll go quick. I'll just flip. What's an analog mission? This is just one of Steve's charts. We'll flip through it. You know what it is. Desired, mid, near, and far. So, there are a few key things where configure terrain on a large scale and small scale. And I can't go through all these right now, but they're listed and they need to get reorganized and prioritized in mid, near, and far term. Some of the desirements, 1 through 7, these were just off the board. Next chart, time-wise. More of that same wish list that goes into finer print. And I wanted to mention this, since it's new, that there's a new activity that Caterpillar is sponsoring. And this is in a nice area on the dry side of right next to the airport, which is scheduled for about 10 months from now. It's an international robotics competition with college students. Next one, just a picture to get off the stage here. That's yeah. I mean, that's a real picture, though. So
next is a cultural consideration by Michel and Al.
Thank you. I was worried about falling off the stage. So I thought, hey, he's got the answer. Just go to the other side. Okay. So we started listing cultural considerations and then benefits and trying to go from that to benefits. And we decided that it was actually better to talk, it worked better to talk about the benefits first. So we started talking, well, the main thing we discovered or thought about the benefits was that you can't predict them. And we started thinking about Columbus when he first arrived in America, that basically it led to democracy and jazz and horrible cultural things also, and slavery. So there's always good and bad. Tobacco, which was helpful and hurtful. So we think that likely the very same things are going to happen. And it's our role to improve the benefit side of the equation. So then we went back to the cultural considerations like language and you know, different religions and spirituality concerns and governance philosophies and different artistic tastes and so forth, and food, and decided that next slide, please. That we would deal with this not by trying to force unity. There's a way to induce unity sometimes on certain subjects, and I'll get to that in a minute, but we would facilitate individuality. In other words, we wouldn't insist that people could not bring their own art from their own country and so forth, or from their own ethnic group. We should be inclusive and allow that sort of individuality. And we got to this one in an interesting way, the Declaration of Human Rights. We got to it, and this will warm John's heart, by talking about the principles. And we got to the first principle, which was to adhere to valid international rules and agreements dealing with human activities in space with international norms such as the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. And from that we got to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a remarkable document. It's full of, you know, feel-good but important things like there shouldn't be any bias against anybody for their sex, language, race, or religion, etc. But it even has Article 17. Everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. So here it is, something from 1948 that talks about the property rights. And it doesn't say only on Earth or only in space. It just says you have these property rights. So it's a remarkable document. So that brought us, okay, so we moved on to education, outreach, and so forth. The overview, yeah, we can go on to the overview effect. That was actually Emmeline's idea. And would you raise your hand so everybody knows who you are? So, you know, everybody's heard about the overview effect. You know, looking back, you know, one of the Apollo astronauts was on his way to the moon, and he did something that wasn't in the instructions. He turned around and he took a picture of the Earth. And that one picture led to the environmental movement. So that was the overview effect. But Evelyn made the point that there's also an overview effect with the moon, and that there are various people looking up at the moon and becoming awestruck. It led to ideas about spirituality and religion, and also calendars and, you know, ways of time to segment time up in productive ways, etc. So there's a great overview effect that also comes from the moon. Next, please. And I guess I just said that. It inspired centuries of art and music, etc., honeymoons, so forth and so on. Next slide. So, are we done? I guess that's it.
No, you've got outreach.
Outreach. We had a separate outreach person, correct? Okay, we broke that up. There you go.
So last one is outreach. And we recognize that and how to promote MVA among the general public is the most important thing, especially for the MVA promotion to the mainstream. Non-space geek is one of the most important things. Of course, we still need a traditional space outreach channel, like existing opportunities. So calendar of the year is Yuri's Night, and ISDC, and IAC, and next year is Apollo anniversary, and World Space Week, United Nations, and so on and so on. And also the existing opportunities project, DARPA Grand Challenges, Centennial Challenges, and related competitions, NSS space competitions. And we have in Japan and space architecture competitions, and others, and university senior project, and so on and so on. But more valuable thing is non-space. For example, one club, New York City. I didn't know this, but it's very precious opportunity. And business show, Las Vegas, and so on, so on, Europe, Japan, and all over the world. And one of the example is Yusaku Maezawa, you know, and now Yusaku Maezawa bought not only Moon Tourist one seat, but the one whole BFR. And this project, Dear Moon Project next, is the most famous moon project now after Kaguya. So this is a kind of non-space, get into the space. And as a result, very famous. So next, please. So they, Maezawa would like to go to moon with 8 artists. So maybe you are so many candidates here. Next. And what is the content for outreach? So, and we have now so many moon missions from now on compared to the previous. And not only science, so and for outreach, it's not only science aspect, but also moon as a location for industry and commerce. Industry and commerce is a kind of new element and a new essence. And the mission lines infrastructure side, ISRU, power production, oxygen production, 3D printing, robotics, habitation, and so on. But now we will have a human settlement. So railways, mobility, sociology, culture, overview effect, moon as a second home, and issue of size and regulation, and so on, so on. But now, what is definition of settlement is another popping up we have. We need this kind of definition. Maybe NSS has so many discussions so far. Next. And there are suggested ideas to make space accessible. Competition challenges, contents including both STEM and STEAM, plus art. Industrial demonstration on Earth, 3D printing using rigorous simulant, oxygen production using rigorous simulant, and so on and so on. And to the moon and on the moon, lunar solar sail race, lunar equator race, lunar North Pole race, South Pole race, so several ideas, and also yes, mainstream contest and so on is space sweets and space food and poetry using the lunar simulant, and the most thing is sports. And it's pity we had so many ideas and discussions, but not the conclusion here. So I put my idea instead of our conclusion. So it's going to be the age for human beings to live on multiple planetary bodies within the next few decades. We must consider what are the social consequences of human beings living and working in space by construction of permanent space infrastructures. For civilization to grow beyond a single home planet for human beings, it is inevitable to consider sociology and cultural aspect. So this is my idea to put in the outreach. And the last 3 slides by additional outreach essence from
I won't be more than half an hour. I don't want to give away my age, but when I was a very young person, I was riding in a car with a bunch of other people. We're going to a football game at the University of Iowa, minding our own business, and the radio came on and said, these are the first signals from outer space. It was Sputnik, and that was a huge milestone, and it influenced everybody, especially myself. And we see other milestones, the first human in space, the first person on the moon, and so on. So what are milestones in the future? I think we can get the public excited about what's possible coming up. And for the last 60 or 70 years, we've been doing science on the moon. We've been gathering information, taking temperature, measuring neutron flux, taking photographs, gathering data. But now we're going to make the transition to doing useful things on the moon. This is a big deal, doing ISRU. So what is the one experiment that's going to be significant? And that will be the production of electricity from the first solar cell that's manufactured from lunar regolith material. That will signify the time that we are independent of Earth resources. We can do everything in space based upon space resources. So maybe that could be an X Prize to signify the beginning of the spacefaring age. A second milestone, working with Steve Durst with ILOA, and I noticed it was in Ad Astra, is the first woman on the moon. Well, this signifies humanity, the full complement of humanity. So one other thing, this is my own personal view, the MVA talks about putting human settlements on the moon. That's great. What's the end point? And I would suggest that the end point would be a fully inhabited sister planet of the Earth, that the goal would be the planet Moon. That'd be our second home in space. Mars would become the third home. So, big village. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you, Group 5. Yes, okay, thank you. It is now officially 3:30. At least approximately. And so now we turn the podium over to Oleg. And we don't have as much time as we would have liked for this panel discussion. But nevertheless, I did not want to cut off any of the working groups. I will just mention again that the book is still open. Please do continue working on your charts and on your ITBCs, either individually or better yet as a group, and get additional inputs in, especially the group on science.
Hello again, everyone. The official title of the current session and panel discussion is Next Steps for the MVA. In fact, you have heard already from Giuseppe Ribaldi in the first presentation of yesterday that there is a vision of what and how these first next steps should look like. To launch the discussion in which we suppose primarily Moon Village Association institutional members should take part, and I invite those who are still in the room from my first panel, namely Torsten, Mark, then I know, you can also, whoever wishes, in fact, could join, but representing institutional members. So Lockheed Martin is on the stage? Yes, please. And you can intervene from your own seat as well. So, but in order to start, no, please take a seat. In order to start the discussion, I wish to share some views with you, my personal views. John, can you see the presentation in question?
Space inspiration?
Yes. But it's to be uploaded a bit later. So, not now, not immediately, in 5 minutes. So, the most evident and obvious next step for us is to make use of all those very interesting presentations and ideas that we have just heard about, and within the next 2 weeks, as far as I understand, yes, John, to accumulate and to summarize everything, and in a natural way, we will have a kind of a program of our actions for the near future. But apart from this, very shortly, we will hear the results of the selection of the host city for our next annual event. And I believe that immediately after that, our real work on the preparation of the next annual event should start. Then, another useful thing we can envisage is that we conduct not only once a year annual events organized by the MVA or under the auspices of the MVA. I believe that it is in our all interest to have as many useful events as possible. I call them standalone events, devoted to any particular topic of interest to the MVA members, be it standards or analogs or whatever you wish. And for this, we don't need, in fact, a competition to be announced. For this, any MVA member, be it organization or a group of individuals, may come up with a proposal to organize this kind of standalone event. And I would particularly like to see our members belonging to non-space industry. I have had conversations already here with some of them, and I would appreciate if some of our members come up with the idea of having an event already maybe next year devoted to, for example, how non-space industries could contribute to the Moon Village development. Of course, there should be a set of criteria for hosting this kind of events, since these events are going to happen under the roof of the MVA. But as I told you, there will be no competition. Still, we have to make sure that the organizers stick to certain requirements. And it's something I suppose to do very shortly, and to formulate those requirements as soon as possible. Now, John several times alluded to the Space Industry Association. I would completely agree, being a representative of the industrial company, a big animal called Yuzhny Design Office. And I think maybe one of palpable contributions the MVA could make is indeed what was mentioned 20 minutes ago, something like confers. This is what we discussed yesterday and which is close to my heart, so to say. I believe that this could be a very valuable contribution to the industry, to the whole moon-related affair, and we should see how to use Confers model to maybe create our own approach to tackling the standardization issue. I believe it's within our reach and within our capability. Another possible step for Moon Village Association, in my view, is that we can present our ideas on this or another important topic in the form of the position papers and recommendations to those who make decisions in our world. Space agencies, big companies formulating and implementing programs related to the moon. And I think along these lines we should undertake several actions. Last but not least, competitions. We have seen that the competition whose results we presented yesterday was quite a success. And I believe we should continue organizing these kind of events, maybe on not so wide topics as creation of moon ecosystem and possible contribution to this by startups and general public. Maybe we could choose one particular topic. Again, I can refer to the non-space industry contribution to the Moon Village affair or anything else. And to organize this kind of competition under the sponsorship of companies interested in the subject, with invitation to different stakeholders, to general public, students, scholars, etc., etc. That said, I would like to give a floor, just to continue the topic of non-space industry, to our institutional member, the company called SOM, the well-known company in the field of architecture and design, which is on top of this our bronze sponsor of the current event. I invite Daniel to make his presentation, which will last, I suppose, 7, 8, up to 10 minutes, not more. And then we come to our podium for discussions on the topics I have touched upon, but also we are open to any other related to the subject. Please, Daniel.
All right, so in the essence of time, I'm going to try and keep this brief. And first slide, please. So if you're not aware of SOM, SOM is an architecture and engineering firm. The firm is over 80 years old, based in Chicago. I'm coming out of the New York office. The New York office opened back in 1937, and that office is known for designing and engineering some of the biggest structures in the world. And I'm going to show you briefly how to make a continuum between architecture here on Earth and how we tackle the challenges of building large-scale infrastructure, large structures, and how we hope to help streamline design and engineering for space applications.
Hey, Gary? You still here? Gary? You fixed this for last time.
No worries.
Here it comes. Don't trip. Be careful. Safety first. It went off. Gary, no. Okay,
better with the imagery.
Really? There's a reason why you don't push these buttons, John. I told you that's why I don't push these buttons. They work for me normally.
Lose a battery?
Matt, you got an issue here. I'm sorry. You can cut its power. Hang in there, it will be back.
Okay. There you go. Great. Thank you. Thanks, John. Okay, so first slide, please. So this first slide here is just to show you the diverse set of projects that we're working on. We work on everything from small scale using additive manufacturing techniques, like you see on the lower mid section. This is a project that we worked on together with the U.S. Army Corps. Right next to that, that's the project that we worked on together with the National Oak Ridge Lab and the U.S. Department of Energy. And then we're also working on large-scale projects like the Burj Khalifa. This is an iconic tower. Everybody's aware of this project, 828 meters tall. And then some of the projects that I've been involved in personally. But this is just to show you the wide variety of architectural systems that we're working on. And the reason we're here today is because we want to try and establish a continuum between terrestrial architecture and what that architecture might look like beyond Earth. Next slide, please. So here's 12 of the tallest buildings in the world, a system of systems. Every single building is composed of structure, electrical, telecommunications, mechanical, all of the systems that you have to deal with to build these tall structures. It's a lot of work, and it takes a concurrent design and engineering framework. And if you click on the next slide, 7 of those we're responsible for. And the only way that we can achieve those is by using computational techniques, using in-house engineering capabilities, and systems engineering. Next slide, please. So here's a demonstration of the various projects. So for example, some of these projects go up to 380 meters tall. And if you compare that to structures like the BFR, the Falcon 9, with the BFR being only 106 meters tall, or the Falcon Heavy being 70 meters tall, you know, these are huge structures. And if you can imagine the kind of complexity that goes into these, I feel like architecture and space applications definitely have something to say to each other. Next slide, please.
You just need to put some rocket engines on them.
Exactly. So here's a really interesting project for us because I think it speaks to modular construction and also taking advantage of additive manufacturing techniques. And it's projects like this that we're using as precedents for being able to develop what we hope will be a lunar architecture. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Next slide, please. Here's another project, a KFT conference center. And this is just to show you the digital models that we put together using computational techniques to be able to discretize geometry, analyze that geometry, and build construction models so that we can send that to manufacturing machines and out into the field for construction. Next slide, please. This is Pertamina Tower. This was set to be a carbon neutral tower, and what you see here is you see the rendition on the left, and that taper is there for performance reasons. It's meant to funnel air to the crown, where you have turbines that collect that wind and transform that into energy. So you can imagine starting to feed the architecture with performative qualities that can then start to influence the behavior of the forms. Next slide. Here's a depiction of the KFD again, with structural components that are created using those digital tool sets. Next slide. And finally, a cooperation with the U.S. Army Corps. Our role here is very limited, but what we design is the architecture. And when we say architecture, what we mean is the form. And that form is there to help increase and amplify the structural rigidity, but also to reduce the amount of material that you need to build that structure. And so when you think about space applications, you can start to think about how you can make that connection between architecture, design, and engineering. Next slide. So here, this slide is just to introduce what a lunar environment might look like. And our challenge here is, how is it that we can obligate architecture in the way that we approach problem solving in an extreme environment like the lunar surface? Next slide, please. And what we've done is we've established a cooperation together with ESA and MIT, working together to produce an architectural vision, but more specifically, commercial habitat systems. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start to speed this up, but this is just some of the things that we started to look at. So taking a deeper dive into understanding the moon system, the Earth-Moon system dynamics. Next slide, please. The moon topography, trying to understand the difference in topology and looking for sites that can help address some of the challenges that everybody here has been talking about, whether it's science operations or trying to look at the deep history of the lunar surface. Next slide, please. And then also identifying locations, especially on the poles where you have anywhere between 89 to 86% of continuous daylight. And so that starts to obligate the way that we approach architecture because of the need to collect energy and the need to access resources in the poles. Next slide, please. And here's just a slide to show some of the research that we've been conducting in terms of water ice deposits. And we understand from the Chandrayaan missions that there's quite a bit of water ice deposits on the South Pole, also the North Pole. But we've been more specifically looking at the South Pole. Next slide, please. And here's a list of all the different challenges that we've started to identify. But we understand that those challenges also translate into opportunities, opportunities for design creativity and coming up with novel solutions that don't just apply to space architecture, but also can be repurposed for terrestrial applications and hopefully helping inform the way that we approach design and engineering here. Next slide, please. So the way that we're doing that is by first defining a new lunar architectural paradigm. And we say this because there is no precedent for a surface architectural application. And because there is no precedent, we have to define this together holistically by reaching out to the community, being a part of associations like the Moon Village Association and partnering with ESA. Next slide, please. And we want to make sure that whatever we design is somehow centered around the human experience. That means creating a design that is deployed and delivered by humans, not robotically, because there's a lot of, I think, emphasis on transportation and robotic capabilities right now. But for lunar habitat systems, we feel strongly that there's going to be a need for a human component, which means assisted or somewhat automated construction, where the human becomes the center of that, and that the human can play a huge role in the way that the habitats are deployed and assembled. Next slide, please. And here you see a depiction of what that means. Next slide, please. And so the research that we've started to conduct for this is looking very specifically at payload capabilities, so current fairing designs, and making sure that our parametric models conform to these constraints, so that as we start to iterate through different design solutions, we can always update our solutions based on mass, dimensional, and payload capacities. Next slide, please. Also trying to understand that there's other opportunities for delivering habitats to the surface of the moon, like using a lunar orbital platform. That means making our designs interoperable with staging mission procedures, or also, next slide, or sending something directly to the surface of the moon. Next slide, please. And here what you see is a very brief depiction of what we started to imagine. So the way that we're designing this is by establishing a design criteria that is based on scientific, industrial, but also practical operations. And so you can imagine having a ready-made surface habitat that can be used for all of these different criterias, meaning that you can have a wide range of players, wide range of users, and the habitat can be used for any customer that's interested. Next slide. Here's a depiction of what that might look like. Next slide. I think, and this is just a quick snapshot of the site a little bit closer. So you can see that we've identified a very specific region on the southwest of the Shackleton crater. And that's because of the geologic interest here. So there's a lot of geologic character that we've started to work together with ESA to identify, but also smaller water ice deposits that we imagine can be studied and accessible much easier. Next slide. Another close-up. Next slide, please. This is just a quick master planning diagram just to show how we're starting to think more holistically about the project. And like I said before, this is still in the preliminary stages. So what we're starting to do here is craft a framework so that when we design these lunar habitats, they're also part of a much larger strategy. Next slide, please. And you can see that we've started to include components like energy collection, food production, landing sites. Next slide, please. And here we're starting to focus on very specific structural techniques. So the first one that we're focused on right now, which we hope to prototype in the near future, maybe by the end of next year, is the Class 1 pre-integrated structure. Next slide. And this is a quick video of how we are approaching the design process by using some computational techniques to optimize the volume. And what you see here is you have 4, 3, and 5 point configurations, but those configurations each produce a very distinct level of opportunity for using those spaces, for fitting them with racks for life support systems or crew quarters or different kinds of scientific workstations. Next slide, please. And here's a slide just to demonstrate how we've started to think about the structure. So here, what we're focusing on is a centralized structure. You have a centralized core. You have floor panels which fold out, and an enclosure system, which is a deployable system. And that deployable system is something that we're going to have to study in depth because of the need to protect from radiation and also to ensure that it can be deployed safely. Next slide. Next slide. You can move on to the next slide. Next slide. I don't want to talk too much about those drawings. Next slide. It's all preliminary. And that's it. So I think what I want to leave off with is that SOM is not just investing in space. We really want to try and make sure that everyone involved in this project has a say. And so that means partnering up with the right people, whether it's material science or deployable systems or even transportation capabilities. And the more we reach out, the more we can get feedback on how we should approach this problem, the better design this is going to be. And it's going to be a great project, I think, for everyone to be a part of. And hopefully by next year you'll see some really big advancement in this. And that's it.
Daniel Innocenti, thank you so much. So I'm afraid, due to the lack of time, we have just one tour of your opinions on where and how the Moon Village Association should move now, what are the next steps, and maybe you can also reflect a little bit on how the MVA could help you in implementing your plans, being institutional members of the association. Ladies first.
That's good, because I need to get on a plane. Okay, so I think the question was about maybe trifold here. But I guess one of the ways that I think maybe moving forward is picking a few discrete of these kind of working group areas and really fleshing them out. I feel like we had a lot of ideas and a lot of things that were discussed. but not, I feel like if we focused maybe in the next year, picked like the 3 most important, maybe send out a survey, and then have a lead, a discrete lead, maybe either a company or a person for each of those, and really dig deep and work within the Moon Village community to really determine a discrete product that can maybe then be outbriefed at next year's symposium as part of maybe the first day. And then, you know, from there, maybe dig into some of the workshops. That's just, I don't know, maybe my opinion, and Rob and I talked a little bit on it this afternoon. From a helping the industry perspective, and maybe this is a little more biased to my personal experience, the whole standards discussion is really an important one. And we really need to figure out standards on an international level, especially if we're going to have what I hope is a real international community, both on the surface and in orbit around the moon. We need to figure out those standards, and they need to be as industry-based as possible to ensure that we can help grow the industry, and also really be, you know, remove some of those barriers to entry for a lot of these companies, especially some of the smaller players. And if we can do that on a level that's already in existence, that both manufacturing sites around the world are used to dealing with, and maybe, you know, pick a standard unit of measure would be good too. Sorry, I'm from the US, but, and we do design Orion in both. We have both English and metric units in the requirements. I know, I worked requirements on Orion for a while. But that's, I guess, just a few kind of comments on our perspective. Let's go this way, there's more people.
All right, so we have, you know, we went through a bit of effort putting together those items to be considered. So I'd like to see those collated. I'd like to see where there's commonality. And from that list, we should have a pretty good, you take those and compare those against the principles, compare them against the goals, and you can say, okay, well, here's 2 or 3 that are really seem to be top priority, that are addressable in a defined time frame. Addressability is always important, and focus on those. And it's kind of like what you were saying, and from an individual corporate standpoint, of course I'm biased, I put this in as a item to be considered. If Moon Village Association could look at really across the board on scenarios and the items in particular scenarios and how what the linkages are. And so that really helps in the planning, because it won't be just one pathway. There will be multiple branches, but at least get an idea on where people see those forks occurring. And that would be helpful.
Yeah. I think the main topics are, in my opinion, where to go were said already. So focusing on a few of the elements we have seen here are, is there a need for 5 working groups? Can it be smaller? I mean, I think it has to be shaken out. What is really important? What is top priority for the next year, for the next 2 years, for the next 5 years, and what is nice to have. I think that's work to be done on your end. From our point of view, as a small company or a small player in this field, not having the big dreams like the big corporates, for us it's an interesting resource to be here to get inspired with ideas, to find partners, and to use it as a platform. That's how I would see it. Yeah.
Hi. My company is Astrax, and our company is doing parabolic flight services in Japan now. And also from next year, we are starting the space tourism, suborbital flight services. And then our company is doing a space tourism to the moon near future. And so, and now we are developing, or we are making more realistic moon city, village, like a sim city. So, for example, the cafe on the moon, or a school on the moon, or a restaurant on the moon, or a nail salon on the moon. So, actual shop or a store or organization is working together to make a city on the moon. And now we are making a mapping. By using real estate on the moon, I don't want to talk about this things about real estate because it's I don't know, it's taboo or it's a big issue, but we can buy the land of the moon from the lunar embassy, but I don't know it's real or not, but it's good tools to image image the city of the moon. So we are just using like a tools to ignite the more imagination. But anyway, in the future, we will live on the moon. So we need to imagine more realistic city on the moon. So I think we need more discussion. So please remember just abstracts. Thank you.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think it's a platform for collaboration amongst all these different companies of different sizes, from total startup to large corporates. Certainly, since we've been, as I mentioned in my comments, since we've been part of MBA, it has provided that opportunity for cislunar industries, and I think it continues to be that platform. To me, that's one of the best things that it can do, actually, is coordinate and facilitate the cooperation so that when companies like ours want to find partners who can provide the different aspects of what we're trying to do, this can serve as one of the venues to do that. So, I mean, I think that's a really great thing. And I also liked what you were saying, Mark, about fleshing out the scenarios, because that definitely helps to do the business planning with, I can make up my own scenarios, but if a third party, especially a large group third party, is building them as well and has lots of people contributing, it adds credibility to the use of those scenarios, something to base off of, and perhaps it adds more credence when you're going to try to fundraise and that sort of thing. So, but really for me, the essence of it is collaboration, cooperation, and facilitating that amongst the group. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so I see this also as an opportunity for us to really study the reciprocities between different industries, because coming from a background in architecture and engineering, we approach designing very differently from the way a company like Lockheed approaches design, for example, where in aerospace industries, the design approach is typically obligated by the engineering first, and then the architecture or the design can somehow, make that more performative or more synthetic, where in architecture sometimes things are obligated by a kind of predetermined vision, and then the engineering comes in afterward. And for me at least, it's always been a keen interest of how is it that we can take engineering to the next level? How can we make architecture and engineering speak to each other in such a way where it's really, like fused, it's a fused process. So I think this is a great organization to be able to have that conversation and to find the right partners who want to have that conversation.
Daniel, I've got a
Yeah.
suggestion. When you do these drawings from now on, do a beautiful foundation and a platform just like you would for Allwood and for all the other buildings. Because without it, the dust is going to mess
That's a good point. That's good feedback. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed to our panelists. Someone would like to comment or add some suggestions, please?
Since standards are a big issue, we had that big discussion too. Those of us who are developing things, building things or creating things, if we identify interfaces that we should be a standard, that should be a standard, we should document that and make those public, make those available, make those open source. And maybe MVA is a repository for those ideas. We have existing standards for things we've done, but we're going to be doing things we haven't done. And so as we move into that realm, if we identify those interfaces where we want others to connect with us to enlarge our business, or we want to interface with somebody else to work with them or enlarge their business, then we should make those interfaces public and let others produce them, use them, and let MVA be a host for them.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I appeal to the institutional members. Michelle or someone else, do we want to add something? We still have a couple of minutes. Okay. The last probably, sorry.
There was a discussion in the science working group about the phased approach to how you would approach the science locations. So I'd like to put out to the science community and to the group here that when we first land at these pristine sites that have not been touched for eons and billions of years, that we protect those sites from the developers in the initial stages of that, so that the science can be accomplished, so you don't contaminate the science. This is especially true in the case of a lava tube pit, for example. We don't want to have a lander land so close to it that the plume exhaust contaminates the site and the science can't be done. So then it should be a phased approach where eventually, the science will back off when the characterization's been done, and then we can do the development part of it. So that there should be some sort of like a planetary protection protocol, in some sense. It might not be the right word, science protection. ITBC. I have one. It's in there. It's in the system.
Thanks a lot. Let us once more thank all our panelists for their valuable contribution. And we are exactly on time to start the final part of our workshop and symposium. So I give the floor to Giuseppe. John? Okay.
Actually, both of us. So I'd just like to say, by way of beginning some closing remarks, I would just like to say what a pleasure it has been to see all of you here and to work with you over the last couple of days. I would like to encourage you to continue thinking about the things we have talked about over the next 2 weeks while the window is open. And I would especially like you to please think about what you heard in the plenary discussions and what you heard from the other panels. So the fact that you are in Working Group 4 doesn't mean that you may not have something really important to contribute to Working Group 2. And so please do think about that. And also, going forward from today, if you are not yet a member of the Moon Village Association, then let me mention that it's only 50 euros. And please join. Unless you want to become an institutional member, in which case that's only for small firms, 100 euros and so on. So this is a shameless commercial. For what size? Oh, for no, it's universities. It's NGO and university is 100. I apologize. I misled you, Dallas. I admit to having misled you. I was thinking of NGOs. So, Giuseppe. Oh, and Giuseppe has reminded me 15 times in the last 2 hours. Principles, the Moon Village principles. So one of the things that we are going to be doing, we have asked everyone to read them and to think about them. We've gotten some comments from some of the working groups, but not all of them. We are going to take the comments that we have received, and we will redraft to make a second draft of the principles, the Moon Village principles, and we will send them out by email to all of you who are here and those who have already left, and ask you to look at them again and to please provide us with comments. I will ask, of course, that if you would be so kind, since we will be receiving comments from almost 100 people, we hope, and during a short period of time, please, I will send them to you as an MS Word, but don't wordsmith. Don't, do track changes or something, because it's impossible to fuse that. Please do provide your comments separately. Like, you should add some discussion of this, or this way of saying this is incomplete, or whatever. It's okay? More? Okay.
I think concerning the principle, just to be clear, we want to issue those as soon as possible, because I think this is part of the identity of the Moon Village and the Moon Village Association. So we do have a text, which is the text which has been handed over to all the groups basically yesterday. So I was hoping to have a consolidated text which we could have shown today, but I do understand that from a practical point of view, this will require to have a sort of break. So as alternative, what I would propose, since we would like to send also this to all the organization, including press and anything else, that we should do that by sending out a press release as soon as the exercise which you just described has been completed. And I think we should give a deadline, so I say something like 30 days, counting from today, and we will put on a website so that not only the people which has participated to today's workshop, but there are many people which are not here. They may follow us by streaming, so to give a chance to them. And we will put those as they stand now on our website, hopefully as of tomorrow. And then after 30 days, the door will be closed, and then we will consolidate, and then these things will be issued. We have to see if there is an opportunity, another event where this can be made public. If not, we will issue as a press release. And of course, we will send to all of you, including, of course, also press, like our Space News people, as well as few other people. But we want to make sure that the principles that we send out have been basically discussed, as well as agreed, at least by the people, the majority of the people. And then from then on, those will become, certainly within the end of this year, the Moon Village principle. So that we can start in a clean way, 2019, full of moon mission and activity, and we will be able to refer all of us, and hopefully also Space Agency, to mission and activity which are related to the moon mission, so to the moon village. So I guess this is probably the best compromise that, John, I think that I believe we can reach today. In a sensible way. Otherwise, we will end up with a discussion about the text in real time. And of course, it will not be complete because there will be a number of people which have given input. So we should do things properly and seriously as the organization has started to be from the beginning. And I would like, of course, to continue. So in terms of output of the workshop, because of course we are coming towards the end, we have a few other announcement before we close, but in terms of output, there is going to be, you said at the beginning, so am I allowed to repeat them? So there's going to be a report, which of course, but this report might take a bit longer, because it might take even probably to all the end of the year. which document presentation. Well, like we did last year, you can go on the website. I think this was an excellent report. Again, John made a great job for that. On the principle is the second, and for me personally, very important output. And as I said, I have to accept the fact that we can't, let's say, announce it today, but reluctantly have to accept the reality. And so we will defer this release about a month or so. But then after that, certainly within this year, those principles will go out. And the other element, yes, of course, it will be featured in the report. But I think those, they are self-standing. People do not need and don't want to read the report. We need to issue principle, which is 1 page, and this will be distributed widely, hopefully in all the forum, as well as Space Agency. And so I think that's, for me, a very important self-standing output. And then there is the other issue, which is the benefit of going to the moon. This was mentioned by you, so I do hope that as a result of all the input that we have received, we can compile also a self-standing couple of pages, 2 or 3 pages document, as you indicated yesterday. We hold this kind of deliverable to the World Space Week Association. As you know, we have signed an MOU with them, and so we got to give them some deliverables. And the best deliverable is, of course, after this meeting. So we are not going to invent ourselves, because otherwise there's no point to the meetings. So I think we will. So those are exactly the deliverables that you said. All the data are somehow embedded in the report. However, those two particularly are very important as a self-standing, let's say, deliverable. So with that, in terms of output, I would say that is all, unless, John, you want to add something about on the technical part before we go to the other part of the concluding remark. Okay, all right, okay, all right. Yeah. Please. Would you like to do that? I know, it's your book, so I think you...
It's my book, but as the president of the Moon Village Association, we should tell him that the moon is the place to go.
Oh, okay, so I think, thank you for giving me this book, which is not my book, but officially I can present to the Vice President. Thank you so much. First of all, let's take the opportunity to thank John. Let's take the opportunity to thank John for the outstanding job.
You said we got it yesterday.
Yes, I got yesterday. So John, so we are now entering towards the second and final stage.
It's fine. You pressed.
Okay.
You turned it off.
Okay. No problem. Okay. So I think I wanted to thank again John for outstanding job, and of course all the Mankins family, which has been essential part of this organization. So before coming to the final remark, let me first ask John whether he has anything that he'd like to add. Please.
The only thing I would also add is I would just mention that getting to this point and having this meeting did start last spring in terms of the planning, and it started with preliminary discussions within the board, and it was, although it was somewhat of a family affair for the Mankins family, it was also a product of everybody else that you have seen here today, and several others. Tai Sik Lee, who this time I don't forget. And of course, Oleg Ventovsky. And Emmeline De Antonio. Where is Emma? There she is. And people who are not here, but just to show our appreciation, also, of course, Jan Kolar, who is our treasurer and who made all of the financial activities happen. So, yeah. And of course, Andre, who is our webmaster, who did everything and has done it quick. Did I forget anybody who's not here? Oh, and Chris Johnson, who is our legal advisor, who also participated in all of the planning and activities. And of course, for people who are here, I would also like to thank Aggie and Mike Coburn of CEC Global for their efforts in helping with all of the logistics and for being cranky on our behalf when someone needed to be cranky. And also, of course, to the wonderful video and photography team who have been supporting us. Thank you so much. Oh, and well, Giuseppe also already thanked them, but I will just say, and especially to the patience and the efforts of my wife Katie and my daughter Willa for their activities. And lastly, but not leastly, to Giuseppe Ribaldi and the countless.
Okay, so thank you, John. Now we come to a moment which we have promised, which is basically, before my final remark, we have to announce who has won this competition, which we have been running for hosting the next event. So I think who has done all the organization is Oleg. So I will appreciate if Oleg can come and tell us. I think people from the two groups are still here, hopefully, so they can hear the result. So I think, Oleg, the floor is yours, and then I'll get it back to me.
Yeah, thank you. So, very important moment. Keep your breath. For the first time, the next regular annual event of the Moon Village Association was decided as a result of the competition. We have formulated criteria for the selection, and on the 21st of September this year, we announced a competition. The announcement was put on the website, so it was accessible to everybody, and everybody was able to see what the criteria are. As a result, by the deadline, I should say the very last day of the deadline, we have got 2 bids. One came from Tokyo, from 3 universities you can see now, and the second one from Seoul, from ISERI, KSC, KARI, and KSCE. I should tell you that both bids were prepared on a very solid basis. And I would like to thank the bidders very much for their effort and for their interest in the competition. The selection committee did its best to identify who is the best out of the 2. I should tell you that both bids looked very, very convincingly. Still, one of them was a little bit more convincing. The bidder demonstrated a little bit more commitment, a little bit more experience already had before, and finally was much more detailed on how the team would like to proceed immediately after, the day tomorrow, after the announcement is made on the winner. And this is the moment when I would like to say that the winner is Tokyo. Congratulations to the team. We will start tomorrow, as said, And Seoul, please be sure that you should not be discouraged and that we bear you in mind for our future events. Please keep your interest in organizing the event, and we definitely come to you one day in the near future. That's all, and I would like to pass the floor to Giuseppe now.
Okay, so thank you, Oleg, of course, to coordinate all these organizations. So what I would like to do is to, first of all, call the representative of the successful Japanese bid. For Hinatani, please, if you can join us here, because we would like to also, first of all, shake hands with you in representative of the winning bid. But with Zuzu, I cannot see in the room. Where is she? I have checked before asking him. So, because ladies always attract my eyes, and so I could not see her. So, but if she comes, she's more than welcome to join us here. But I would like, I think, first of all, to shake hands with Inatani-san for having won the bid, and I think we should have some pictures, but I will also give him a present, which is... Yes, yes, yes. So I think let's first shake hands. Okay, all right. So, okay, thank you. All right. So, please, you want to say, because I have a present for you. So maybe let me first give you the present. I have a present for you, and then of course, I'll let you speak. So the present is basically, because you have to carry this is basically the banner. Because you have to have a banner next year, so you have the same banner that you have there. Yes, so it's already ready for you for Tokyo. Oh, yes, you have to carry back. So I hope.
More importantly, next year you must pass it to the next one.
Correct. So I think this is for us a symbolic.
Yes, display it to the one of the universities. Yes. One after another. That would be better.
So this was our present. So we are very happy that you won. I think we have several suggestions for you, including a meeting possibly together with United Nations, which will take place before the event, as well as an outreach event. So we have some good work for you and for the local committee. Don't worry. I have plenty of suggestions for you guys, so you don't know what you enter in. But, you can, no, you can't. No, you can't. You can't imagine. Now you got it. So now I leave you the floor for some remarks,
yes.
please.
First of all, anyway, thank you very much for this. And then on behalf of these three universities, major university of the University of Tokyo University of Science, Kyoto University or Keio University, from University of Tokyo University of Science, from Professor Mukai. She was one of the first three astronauts, Japanese astronauts, and she is, of course, a good friend of mine. And Kyoto University is from Professor Takao Doi. He is also my former colleague in the university. We worked together in the university to build a new rocket. And then in the Keio University is Professor Setsuko Aoi. She's a lawyer. She's a specialist in space law. She's very famous in Japan. And those three guys are the major player. We are the guy who are in the background to assist those three major professors in Japan. That's the way of doing things we are. So maybe we are in Tokyo, I will be in the backyard and pushing these three professors and to be active for doing the promotion for the next Moon Village Association meeting in Japan. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. I promise I will be working together with those three professors, and the next MBA conference symposium should be successful. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, because I think this is indeed The date, yeah, I was going, the proposed date at the moment is early December. Of course, we are going to discuss with them immediately after this announcement. We are going to start to have some coordination. I'd just like to make a remark just for the information of other people. Apart from what has been said, we have also in the organization women, ladies, and I think this is a gender policy. It's very important that we have ladies in the organization, and besides having a lady astronaut, in fact, we have two astronauts, two former astronauts in the organization of this event. So I think we could not really have expected better than that. So I think this is very much appreciated.
Much more, how do I say, better public relations because of those guys, other than me. I'm just a poor professor.
Clarification. Please. All three universities together? Yes. As a matter of fact, there is also a proposal to have a main event in Tokyo and then a side event in Kyoto, which is probably what we are going to discuss with them. Some of the, let's say, side event might take place in Tokyo, but of course this is still early days. We just announced about 10 minutes ago. So give the chance to the people to understand. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank, of course, as has been made by Oleg, the team from Korea. This should not be taken as any, every competition as a winner and a loser, but that's okay. I think that is life. So I think we are coming back, and you will have plenty of opportunity to organize side event in Korea during next year. So Mizuzo is there. So Mizuzo, you can join us. I think we just made the picture. We were looking for you, but we didn't get you, so we like to, Mizuzo, she's part also of the local organizing committee of the bid. Yes, of course. So thank you for winning this bid. And you got the present, which is basically, this is the banner, which is already ready for you to be brought back home. So you want another picture? Okay. All right. Okay.
Oh, good idea, good idea.
Better don't move it. Better don't move it. Ladies in the middle. It's okay. Is that okay? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And. Sorry?
She says to...
yes, please.
Oh, no.
Thank you.
Sorry, I had a last-minute shopping at the Science Center. Sorry, I missed a big occasion. But next year, welcome to Japan. We have a hospitality, what is called omotenashi. And omotenashi is the same word of the next lunar mission from Japan by Exploration Mission 1. So, omotenashi is a keyword for us. And welcome to Japan. Thank you very much.
So thank you to our Japanese colleague, and I'm sure we will keep them busy for a while, so you can be sure. It's not a threat, but it's a reality. So thank you for everything. And so I would like now to move. We are nearly at the closure time, so I'd like just a couple of remarks to conclude. John has already made all the relevant thanks, so I don't want to repeat. I don't want to repeat what he has already made. So thank you for extending also all the thanks. I just want to make, if you don't mind, 3 remarks only, and then I will declare this workshop closed. So the first one is that I believe our organization in the last 12 months is increased, is consolidating, we are signing MOU, but I think what is very important is that people need to participate actively. So hopefully today a number of you have seen how the organization is working, or not working, but we hope that it's working. We received a number of useful comments from all our institutional partners. And one of the main thrusts for the next 12 months has to be to reach out non-space company. Non-space company. I said this in my introduction yesterday, that this should not be a standard space funds organization. This should be an organization which have inside non-space company. And the remark associated with it is the following. Elon Musk indicated, right or wrong, that in few years' time there might be available 100 ton on the moon. 100 ton on the moon, no space company can fill them. No space company can fill. So there is a huge market out there for basically equipment and services which might use these 100 tons. And these mostly are going to be non-space companies. So please, in the Moon Village Association in the next 12 months, we will make a priority to try to involve non-space company, and the fact that we are going to Japan next year, they are very aware about this, and I'm sure they will help us to bring a number of not only Japanese non-space company, but also on a global scale. So I think I just wanted to make this remark because this makes a difference compared to what space agency are doing. Space agency, they are not doing that. You heard yesterday Scott, and you heard this morning Greg Ottridge talking about this. So we are really breaking new grounds. So having said that, I would like again to thank all of you for being here, and still a number of people till the end. So that means that people who are still interested. We are basically on time, given the 2 days. So I would like again to thank you, all of you, for being here. And please do spread the news about the Moon Village Association, and do please participate actively in the organization. We are not interested to have numbers of people. We are interested to have people which are working because they believe in what they are doing, and they believe that we can help to go to the moon together in peace. And this is in line with the principle that we are going to publish within the end of the year. So with that, I'd like to thank you, John, and if you don't mind, I'd like to close also the meeting, the workshop, and I hope to see you all in Japan next year and in other meetings, in particular in the United States at ITBC of next year. There will be a Moon Village Association event as per the MOU, and I hope that we have a number of other events which will be organized around the world, but our main event, our annual workshop, will take place in Tokyo next year. So I would like to invite all of you to join us in Japan to have an exceptional workshop, because it's 50 years, as you all know, in 2019. So it's a symbolic year, 50 years since we went to the moon, and we are now looking forward for the next 50 years. So with that, thank you so much to all of you, and I wish a safe trip back home, all of you. Thank you.